Imagine building a wall so strong, so advanced, and so expensive that your entire nation believes it will stop the next war before it begins. That was the Maginot Line, France's massive concrete shield designed to hold back the horrors of another German invasion. But in 1940, Hitler did not break through the wall, he simply went around it. What followed was not just a military defeat, it was the collapse of a national illusion. This is the story of misplaced faith in static defense and how it shattered in the face of Blitzkrieg. After World War I, France bore deep wounds. The fields of Verdun still smelled of blood and smoke. Nearly every family had lost someone. To ensure such horror never returned, French leaders believed they needed more than just diplomacy. They needed something permanent, impenetrable, and immovable, a wall to hold back another German storm. The trauma of trench warfare ran deep in the French psyche. The politicians, haunted by the losses, sought to create a legacy that would both honor the fallen and protect the future. For them, the idea of another large-scale war was unthinkable, and they turned to physical fortification as both a symbol and a safeguard. French leadership understood that the next conflict with Germany was inevitable. But rather than investing in mobile tactics or reimagining warfare, they invested in immobility, believing that no enemy could break a line built from stone, steel, and national determination. Named after Maginot, the French Minister of War and WWII veteran, the idea was to build a chain of fortresses from Switzerland to Luxembourg. Inside were subterranean barracks, artillery turrets, armored doors, and electric rail lines. It was a city beneath the earth, a marvel of modern military engineering. But as construction began, no one could see the storm brewing to the north. The Maginot Line was not a continuous wall, but a series of heavily armed bunkers, observation posts, and underground tunnels linked like beads on a steel cord. From the outside, it looked unbreakable. Deep within the earth, engineers created command centers that could sustain troops for weeks without outside support. Politicians praised the project, citizens felt reassured, and the military pointed proudly to France's technological edge. The cost was enormous, but the psychological value seemed priceless. France was preparing for war, but only the war they knew, not the one that was coming. To the public, the Maginot Line was a source of comfort. Politicians sold it as the ultimate insurance policy. Generals reassured citizens that France was now invincible. Tourists visited bunkers. Newspapers ran stories of indestructible turrets. Yet few considered that the line stopped at the Belgian border, leaving a gap where an enemy could march freely, just like in 1914. The French believed that Belgium would maintain neutrality, just as it had in 1914, and that the British would defend the Low Countries if Germany tried to enter. This strategic miscalculation left a blind spot, a long forested stretch through the Ardennes that French planners believed tanks couldn't traverse. But beyond the tactical choices, the line became a psychological crutch. It represented safety, certainty, and control in a world increasingly marked by uncertainty. That sense of invulnerability would soon be tested and broken. Across the Rhine, Adolf Hitler watched with interest. He knew France's strategy. He'd fought in the trenches. But now, with fast tanks, mobile infantry, and close air support, he envisioned a different kind of war. A war of speed, surprise, and terror. It was called Blitzkrieg, and it made the Maginot Line obsolete before the first shot was fired. German generals studied French defenses meticulously. They mapped every fortress, every gun turret, and every blind spot. What they found was revealing. France had built an unbreakable sword, pointed in the wrong direction. The answer wasn't to attack it, it was to ignore it. Within the German high command, a bold new idea was forming. Bypass the line entirely by storming through Belgium and the Ardennes, then strike deep into the French heartland. France would be outflanked, disoriented, and broken before they even fired a meaningful shot from their precious wall. French military thinking remained rooted in the past. They believed the next war would be slow and static, like the last. Defensive war, not offense, was their dogma. As a result, tanks were scattered among infantry units, and communications were slow. France prepared for the wrong war, while Germany redefined how war was fought. Rather than concentrating their mechanized forces, the French dispersed them to support ground troops, rendering them ineffective against fast-moving German armor. Their command structure was also rigid, reliant on outdated methods like telephone lines and written messages. When war came, France's leadership would struggle to adapt. By the time the nature of the conflict had shifted, it was too late. Strategy, like the Maginot Line itself, had become a monument to the past. The French believed the Ardennes forest was impassable for tanks, too hilly, too dense, too slow, so they left it weakly defended. But the Germans had other plans. With disciplined panzer divisions and reconnaissance teams, they stormed through the forest like a spear. It was the path of least resistance, and France had left the door wide open. The terrain did pose challenges, but the Germans overcame them with precise coordination and engineering. They built temporary bridges, cleared narrow paths, and used aerial scouts to guide their columns. What France saw as a barrier, Germany saw as an opportunity. By the time the French realized the Germans had come through the Ardennes, the invasion was already well underway. The Germans had emerged from the forest like a tidal wave, sweeping past the Maginot Line without ever engaging it directly. At Sedan, along the River Meuse, German forces launched one of the most daring assaults of the war. In just a matter of days, they shattered the French line with speed and firepower. Bombers attacked relentlessly. Tanks crossed makeshift bridges. The Blitzkrieg was in full effect, and the French had no answer. The Germans coordinated airstrikes and tank divisions with terrifying precision. Stuka dive bombers screamed through the skies, targeting French artillery and communication centers. Panic spread through the ranks as soldiers fled and officers lost contact. Within days, the French defensive position collapsed. The Germans had not only crossed the Meuse, they had broken France's will to fight. The Maginot Line sat far behind them, intact but irrelevant, like a sword still in its sheath during a gunfight. Once across the Meuse, the German forces didn't slow down. Instead, they drove like a dagger toward the English Channel, trapping hundreds of thousands of French, British, and Belgian troops in a massive pincer movement. It was a move so bold, even Hitler hesitated. This rapid maneuver left the Allied forces cut off and surrounded in places like Dunkirk. The Maginot Line, still manned and fully operational, was never even attacked. It stood idle as the real war passed it by. Germany's plan was working to perfection. France's strongest fortifications were being rendered completely useless, not by force, but by irrelevance. The front line had moved far beyond the concrete walls. As Allied troops scrambled to evacuate from Dunkirk, the world watched in suspense. Operation Dynamo managed to rescue over 330,000 soldiers. But while it was a miracle for the British, it was a catastrophe for France. The bulk of their northern armies had been lost or captured. French morale plummeted. The government teetered on collapse, and the Maginot Line, still intact, still watching an enemy that had long since moved past its reach. The irony became clear. France had built a wall, expecting another great war. But Hitler had unleashed a new form of warfare. The line was a fortress with no enemy to fight. With German forces sweeping across France at breathtaking speed, Paris became increasingly vulnerable. French troops, disorganized and exhausted, couldn't mount a meaningful resistance. On June 14, 1940, German soldiers marched into Paris without a single shot being fired. The City of Lights had gone dark. The psychological impact was catastrophic. The fall of Paris was not just a military loss, it was a national trauma. A symbol of French pride and history had fallen in less than 6 weeks. The world watched in stunned silence. Back on the Maginot Line, French soldiers remained in their underground fortresses. They listened to radio broadcasts of their nation's collapse, powerless to intervene. Their war, if it ever truly existed, was over. Even as France capitulated, many Maginot Line garrisons held out. Some commanders refused to surrender until they received direct orders. 4 days after the armistice, these outposts remained fully manned and ready. But eventually, reality set in the war had moved on without them. One by one, isolated forts surrendered, some after brief negotiations, others without firing a shot. The Germans took control of the structures, marveling at the engineering but laughing at the strategic blunder. The Maginot Line had become a monument to outdated thinking. It wasn't conquered, it was bypassed, left behind like a forgotten relic of another age. With northern France under occupation and the south governed by the puppet Vichy regime, the French military was effectively neutered. The Maginot Line's promise of safety now looked like a cruel joke. Some of the line's forts were repurposed by the Germans or stripped for parts. Others were simply abandoned, overgrown, and left to decay. The dream of impenetrable defense had withered under the harsh light of Blitzkrieg. France would not rise again as a military power until the Allies returned 4 years later. The Maginot Line, once the pride of the nation, was now its most embarrassing mistake. Adolf Hitler viewed the Maginot Line as a symbol of everything wrong with the French. To him, it represented fear, hesitation, and weakness. He rarely mentioned it in his speeches. It simply didn't warrant recognition. His generals, however, studied it closely. They admired the engineering, but scorned the doctrine. Germany had won not by overpowering France's strength, but by avoiding it entirely. The lesson was clear. In modern warfare, movement and speed trump concrete and steel. The future belonged to those who could adapt, not those who could dig in. Military strategists around the globe took note. The Maginot Line became a cautionary tale studied in war colleges. It was not the strength of the wall that failed. It was the failure to understand how warfare had evolved. Nations began to rethink static defenses. Mobility, flexibility, and air power became the cornerstones of post-war strategy. The age of the fortress had ended, replaced by the age of rapid response. For decades, "Don't build a Maginot Line" became shorthand for avoiding rigid, outdated thinking in the face of new threats. Today, remnants of the Maginot Line still stand. Tourists explore the tunnels. Historians lecture in dimly lit bunkers. The concrete hasn't crumbled, but the myth has. It serves as a solemn reminder that preparing for the last war is no way to win the next. In an age of cyber warfare, drones, and hybrid threats, the lesson of the Maginot Line remains urgent. Technology alone cannot guarantee safety. Only strategy can do that. The Maginot Line didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because its creators believed it could not fail. And that belief, more than any enemy, is what doomed it. The fall of the Maginot Line wasn't just the collapse of concrete and steel. It was the collapse of an idea, a belief that the horrors of war could be held back by walls, by fixed lines, by a past that no longer applied to the future. France's greatest defense was outflanked, not by brute force, but by faster thinking, evolving tactics, and a refusal to cling to yesterday's logic. The lesson of the Maginot Line echoes far beyond World War II. It warns us not to prepare for the last battle, but to anticipate the next. In war, in policy, even in life, relying too heavily on what once worked may blind us to what's coming. The Maginot Line still stands today, silent, cold, a museum to miscalculation. If you found this story as compelling and cautionary as we did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more powerful, immersive stories from history in full color. Share this with someone who still believes walls can stop storms. Until next time, keep questioning the past to understand the present and prepare for the future.